If God exists and he's supposed to be all good, then why does evil exist in the world? If he's all powerful, he could get rid of it. If he's all knowing, he has to basically agree to its being there. Mm-hmm. Is that really consistent with the loving God?
Now, you've said that AI Singularity made it easier for you to believe in God. Can you break that down?
So the idea is...
A big moment in your conversion journey was the awareness of the occult. What are you exposed to?
If there is such a thing as a spirit world, if the occultists are tapped into it, then I want to keep those doors closed.
Very smart. There's views out there of like lesser Elohims, these forces that were part of the divine council.
Michael Heiser,
yes.
Look, in the Bible, it will talk about the gods of the Canaanites. The word that is used is Elohim. Does that not mean that those demons were actually little gods? Mm-hmm. No, that's not what it means.
You were pretty vocal about there not being good arguments for the existence of God, like not convincing enough. But which one did you eventually believe?
I could talk you through that, I guess. So,
This is The Deep End with Lecrae.
Okay. I'm very excited today because I get to nerd out a little bit. You know, some people may know I'm like a translator. You know, I can absorb a lot of information and then I try to translate it into layman's terms. So I'm not very good at saying it the way these brilliant people say it, but I can understand it. And then I try to translate it. So one of these very brilliant people is in the room today. We have Larry Sanger, who is the co-founder of Wikipedia, and in the past few years has had an incredible journey to meet Christ. And that is, that's astounding to me. But I mean, we're going to do a deep dive. So could you give us a short summary of your life and who you are? And yeah.
Sure. Let's see. I was born in the Seattle area, moved up to Alaska when I was 7, and I was raised Lutheran. I fell away, basically in my teen years. And then I went to college at Reed College, Portland, Oregon. And I wanted to become a philosophy professor. I actually wanted to build a system of philosophy. That was my life's goal when I was young. And then I got really disappointed with philosophy. And at the same time, I finished my PhD, but it actually took the financial incentive of a pay raise from Jimmy Wales when I was starting Wikipedia, as it happens, that actually let me finish it, basically, motivated me to finish it. And then after that, basically, I entered a second career in basically education, reference online. Yeah, a little bit of social media stuff. Mm-hmm. And I've been doing that ever since. But then and I got married, had a couple of kids who we homeschool, and then moved to Ohio, which is where I live now. And then in 2020, I read the Bible through for the first time, all the way through for good understanding, which I'd never done before. Mm-hmm. And to get ahead of ourselves a little bit, it transformed my life. And that was 5 years ago, but I put off actually making an announcement about it, telling the story, because I wanted to be ready to, contend for the kingdom,
Wow.
forcefully.
So there's a lot of interesting dynamics in what you said. And, one I find particularly interesting is, well, I love philosophy. Before I was a believer, I dabbled in philosophy as well. Dabbled is the key word there. But it's interesting you growing up in this Lutheran family and then like having this leaning toward philosophical perspectives. I know that you before I know the circumstances that happened with the pastor, but before you had this encounter with the pastor, like what were the wrestles? Like how do you feel like you led to become agnostic, even though you're growing up in this Lutheran family?
Yeah, well, like I was even confirmed in the Lutheran Church, Missouri Synod, when I was about 12 or 13.
Mm-hmm.
My family had gone to church since I was a kid.
Yeah.
But I was a very inquisitive kid. Of course, there are lots of inquisitive kids in church, asked lots of questions. I remember asking, for example, what's the difference between the mind and the soul and the spirit on the way to church one day, because these words were being bandied around and I didn't really know what the difference was, and other people seemed to know the difference. So, what happened was, I'm not blaming anybody here for anything, but my mom and dad got divorced when I was about the same time, about 12 or so. And then we stopped going to church after not long. And I just stopped praying. I had prayed a lot when I was a little kid. Stopped thinking about God. And then, I was about 15 or 16. I started thinking a little bit more about that. And it just occurred to me, I don't really believe in God anymore. That was part of it. Another big part, though, was that I had a one semester class in philosophy in high school as a junior.
Okay.
And really liked the teacher. And I was inspired because I realized that the people around me they messed up their lives in various ways. Some of them were on drugs. Some of them had totally ruined their lives really on drugs. And some were, friends of people that I knew were murderers, in fact. And it was very, and then there was my parents' divorce and things like that. These all seem to be rooted in false thoughts. I thought in my teenage imagination that I understood the false things that they believed. The druggies thought that they could achieve some higher consciousness by taking the drugs. And I said, well, I know what their minds are like. They don't have any higher consciousness. They're just wrong about that. But that was only an example. And I said to myself, maybe there are things that I believe or that I will believe that will tend to ruin my life also sometime. And I want to make sure that didn't happen. And
this is all in your early teens.
Yeah, well, toward my later teens.
Okay.
Yeah. Basically, before my senior year, I had all of these thoughts.
Wow.
And then, I decided I wanted to become a philosopher. I wanted to be a philosophy professor and seek the truth with the capital T. So that's basically, it wasn't anything that anyone did. It's just the fact that, we live in a society in which, skepticism is rampant, right? And naturalism, which is just the belief that everything that really exists is, part of our space-time universe describable by science, and there is no more than that.
Right.
So I sort of took that sort of thing, not entirely on faith, but that was my basic standpoint. But then I wanted to even call that into question. You see what I'm saying? Because I thought, but ultimately that made me a methodological skeptic.
Yeah.
Which means not that I didn't believe anything, period.
Sure.
But that I would withhold judgment on things, not say yes, not say no, until I had come to a rational conclusion about the question.
Yeah, it sounds like you approached it with a lot of philosophical and scientific reasoning.
I tried.
Yeah, which is interesting to me because I came into the faith as a skeptic, which is why your story is particularly interesting to me. And the thing that I found myself wrestling with, I wasn't as advanced in my teen years thinking through like things like intelligent design or anything along those lines, but I would wrestle with the concept of morality and where did it come from,
For
and
sure.
what is good, and why do I think things are good, and the standard of those particular things. And so
I thought about that a lot.
Yeah.
Why be moral?
Exactly. And so someone like Nietzsche was like particularly interesting to me because his conclusion.
I read him when I was a teenager.
Yeah. So I was like, well, his conclusion is like, hey, if nothing matters, live as if nothing matters, in some senses. But from what I've heard, he died a pretty horrific death, and
he went crazy.
Yeah. That's what and so you're 17, if I'm not mistaken, and you actually have a conversation with your pastor.
Might have been a year or two after that, but yeah.
Okay.
I called up. I don't think it was the old pastor of the church that I used to go to. I didn't want to put him on the spot. I called somebody else. I don't know who it was. I probably just sounded like a snot-nosed kid, probably not very, respectful. Back in a day when respect was required a little bit more than it is today,
Yeah.
And nevertheless, I had real questions, and I kind of got the brush off from him, I might have asked him questions like, well, the problem of evil, for example. If God exists and he's supposed to be all good, then why does evil exist in the world? If he's all powerful, then he could get rid of it if he wanted to. If he's all knowing, then he knows all of it. So that means that he must, so the word is exceed in it. He has to basically agree to its being there. Is that really consistent with the loving God? To ask a question like that, basic philosophical question. I think what happened was a lot of pastors, a lot of people who are not pastors don't realize this. A lot of pastors are not able to handle questions like that because they don't have a lot of philosophical training. Now, that one in particular, a lot of pastors do have training in because that's sort of meat and potatoes theology.
It should be.
Should be. Right. It should be, but it isn't always.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah.
But some of the other, like, more abstract questions about the particular arguments for the existence of God, they had never really studied much of them. They don't have to in order to be a pastor. So.
And one of the things you said, and I'm paraphrasing, was essentially his inability to answer that question or him brushing you off kind of made you come to the conclusion that, dogmatic, folks are generally Christians because they can't answer these type of questions and they don't have answers. And so their thought process, they're in some senses, I guess they're limited in their capacity of thinking. And so, it makes sense that they would choose.
I went one step further than that. I said there are no answers. I took them as a model, right? Saying that well, if there are any good answers to questions like this, then a pastor is surely going to have an answer. So I just concluded. Later I think I revised my views a little bit, but that was my initial conclusion. That's what really sealed me in my disbelief, my unbelief.
Yeah.
Yeah, that basically, if he can't answer the questions, quickly and easily, then there are no quick and easy answers, period.
Life insurance for me growing up was not something that I thought was important or meaningful. Unfortunately, there were some deaths in my family, and I realized very quickly how impactful life insurance could be. On one hand, if somebody doesn't have it, the family's left having to take care of so many needs and so many things. On the other hand, if there is life insurance, the family is literally set up for taking care of all those needs and taking care of many other things such as college education for kids, on and on goes the pattern. So I did not want to be the person that left my kids having to take care of all of the things that I'm not there to take care of if something should unfortunately happen to me. Now, there's a lot of decisions in life that can wait, but some of them we've really got to take action on. And one of those is definitely getting life insurance. And I'm giving you an opportunity. So Fabric by Gerber Life is very simple, protective way for parents to protect their families so they can have financial security, because we don't know what's going to happen, but things do happen. And a term life insurance policy gives your family so much financial protection. And Fabric by Gerber Life can genuinely help you. So if you're a parent, I know it's very tempting to put your kids' financial needs ahead of your own, and maybe giving them things that you didn't have growing up, or putting money into a savings account for them, and trips and all those things. But an often overlooked act of generosity is making sure they're protected in case something unexpected happens and you're not there to provide for them anymore. I don't want that for my kids. I don't want that for my family. And that's where Fabric by Gerber Life and a term life insurance policy comes in. Fabric by Gerber Life is a term life insurance that you can get done today, made for busy parents just like you, all online, on your schedule, and you can be covered in under 10 minutes with no health exam required. If you got kids, especially if you're young and healthy, it's time to lock in. Low rates are waiting for you now. Even if you have life insurance through your employer, it may not offer you enough protection for your family, and it may not follow you if you leave your job. But Fabric has flexible, high-quality policies that fit your family and your budget, like $1 million in coverage for less than $1 a day. Fabric is partnered with Gerber Life, trusted by millions of families just like yours for over 50 years. No risk, 30-day money-back guarantee, and you can cancel at any time. They got over 1,900 5-star reviews on Trustpilot with a rating of excellent. And Fabric is more than just life insurance. It's your one-stop shop for free digital wills, access to investment accounts to invest in your kids' future, and then more. Plus, you get to manage it all from your phone. So I need you to join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their family. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/Lecrae. That's meetfabric.com/Lecrae. MEET fabric.com/LECRAE. Policies are insured by Western Southern Life Assurance Company, not available in certain states, and prices are subject to underwriting and health questions.
And so,
I was wrong.
of course, but at the time, I've been that same person, so I totally relate. Like in my mind, the only Christian that I knew growing up was my grandmother, and she was, from the country. She was not formally educated. She stopped going to school at, I think, 13 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, I was like, oh, it makes sense that she would choose God because she doesn't have, that gives her a sense of security. And for me, I was like, that's backwoods thinking. I would never choose to believe in God because of, there's just more to think about out here.
Yeah, a lot of times I think we decide what we're going to believe based on the models of the people, So if it's like some backwoods grandma who's not very well educated and so forth, who's, clapping her hands for Jesus all the time, it just seems like it's a symbol of being poor and uneducated to you, and that's like all there is to it. It's just wrong.
Right.
Some of the most brilliant people in the world throughout history, basically from about 300 AD until 1900, the vast majority of people in the West were Christians of one sort or another. I think after the Enlightenment, after about like 1700, people started getting, let's just say, more heretical and less devout. But still, I mean, so many brilliant people. Even today, lots of very smart Christians out there in every field.
Absolutely. To me, I find it amazing how this God is so kind to like extend the gift of faith to people who can't comprehend the parallax of Alpha Centauri, and to people who are studying multi-dimensions in physics.
It doesn't require that, because faith just is loyalty to God.
Yeah.
A baby can have loyalty to God.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's amazing. So would you, at this section in your life, are you moving from being an agnostic to an atheist, or?
No, I never became an atheist.
Okay. So you were purely agnostic, just measuring like, okay, there's something, but I don't know what it is.
It's more, I left the question open.
Okay.
I deliberately left it undecided.
So from your vantage point, what would be the difference between an agnostic and an atheist?
Right. So, place to begin is with a theist. A theist is someone who believes that God exists. There's different ideas about God, but leaving that aside, an atheist is someone who believes that God does not exist. All right. So they make the positive assertion, God doesn't exist.
Yes.
Now, the atheist activists, they don't accept that definition. We won't get into that now. I'm talking about the strict academic usage today among philosophers. An agnostic is someone who neither believes nor disbelieves in the existence of God. In other words, as an agnostic, I wouldn't say God exists, and I also wouldn't say God does not exist. One could say I didn't know, and that was actually true, but the point is I didn't make a claim one way or the other.
Yeah.
So that's all there was to it. And I thought that a true skeptic wouldn't make a negative claim, because then you're actually making a claim that requires a defense, right?
What type of, like, that type of thinking, what was the effect on your day-to-day life?
At first, when I was a late teen and like in college, basically, it was disorienting, but I guess I got to sort of live with uncertainty about my basic beliefs for a long time. And it didn't stay that way forever, especially as I studied more philosophy. I was able to actually come to some conclusions that I guess helped. I ended up embracing something called the Scottish School of Common Sense.
Okay.
Basically, the things that we all, as part of our human nature, just find ourselves believing, can't doubt. In fact, you can say you're doubting it, but you're lying if you do. Those things are all true. Those are the things that I take for granted. They're actually part of I think human beings are actually part of nature. And the things that we by nature come to believe, regardless of where we are in the world, those are the things that I take for granted.
What would be an example of one of those?
I have two hands, for example.
Sure.
My body has been near the surface of the earth for most of its life.
Yeah.
And so forth. All kinds of little things like that.
And those things, you're like, you don't doubt those. You're essentially saying, no, you're not, you're lying, because you function as if you believe this.
Yeah. Well, you can come up with reasons to doubt it. Like
Sure.
Descartes had a dreaming doubt. You could be dreaming all of this. Or, the modern version from the Wachowski sisters now.
The Matrix. Yeah.
Yes. The Matrix, right. So maybe we're just all brains in a vat, as they say. And then how could we really know what's going on? But the idea is that we can take for granted in all of our everyday dealings and our research, for that matter, a certain set of propositions. Another way of describing them is they're implied by all of the ways that we have of thinking and talking about things in our ordinary everyday life. So,
yeah, I find it interesting that, you were talking about people like the drug addicts who are trying to find enlightenment or whatnot. I find it interesting that every system of belief or religion is in some senses trying to mend a gap. Like there's an agreement that there is a gap, right? Like if you say, oh, well, you just haven't reached higher consciousness yet, then you're in agreement that there's a gap between where we are and where we should be.
I see. Yeah.
And whether that is, oh, well, you've got to function in this way to close that gap, or you've got to reach this peak, or you've got to enlighten yourself. I find it interesting that we can all agree that there's a gap. I've been a Christian so long now, I can't remember, because I would have claimed to be an atheist, even though I don't think I really understood what an atheist was.
Yeah.
But what would you say an atheist would say about the gap? Is there a gap? Do human beings, because in my mind, and maybe you could speak to this, in my mind, to be an atheist is to say that essentially we're just a random occurrence of cosmic atoms, and like there's no purpose in anything.
Right.
And so if there's no purpose, there is no gap.
It depends on what you mean by the gap, I think, is what they would say. They would say that there is no, if the thing that we don't know concerns the purpose of the universe or our purpose in the universe, then they would simply deny that there is any such thing, or that we have any good reason to think that there is such a thing.
Okay.
Yeah, that's pretty much what they would say.
What would it, and I know you've never really aligned with like the new atheists, the Richard Dawkins and Daniel Dennett, Sam Harris. To me, that's always been a scary place. Now, we can talk about some of their like critiques or the obnoxiousness that they generally exist in, but I'm initially curious though, for someone out there who may claim to be an atheist, you probably have more interaction or processed it more. From my perspective, everyone is functioning in such a way that they believe they matter. I don't see people like, why feed yourself? Why fall in love? Why be broken? Like, I would say we don't, an atheist would say that nothing matters, but from the outside looking in, it looks as if they're acting as if things do matter.
Right.
And so,
and a lot of them would say, this is just a caricature of me. I think lots of things matter. It's just they matter only for the length of our lives. They don't matter beyond our lives.
right.
That's what I said when I was an agnostic. I said that and I think it's actually important that we do justice to how unbelievers think about the world, because we're not going to be reaching them if we feed them, reflect back to them what are just exaggerations of how they really are.
That's good.
So like what I would have said was, I don't believe in an afterlife, but I don't actually understand why people think an afterlife is necessary in order to give us meaning at all. The reason that my life has meaning is that I greatly value the people who are around me. I think that I'm helping humanity.
Yeah.
Humanity is inherently valuable. What's the mystery?
Yeah.
Right?
Which makes sense. I guess my question, or the thing that drove me kind of cuckoo as I was trying to wrestle with my faith, was why?
Yeah.
Like, okay, well, everyone's valuable. Why are they valuable? Because I said so? Because someone's, and then if I believe we're valuable, is my belief that we are valuable as, I don't know, substantial as someone's belief that we're not? It's kind of like, how do you process that?
It's a hard question. I mean, basically, I'm writing a book about this. I have a whole chapter. That's talking about the very idea of what is good in itself. That's the question that we're talking about here. And I do say I actually have to come up with an argument. And I have an argument that human life is the most valuable thing. Right? If you want me to answer the question, I can. But I also root it ultimately in the existence of God. I don't make the existence of God dependent on this argument, though.
Sure.
You see what I'm saying?
Sure.
But it contributes to the conclusion. So the idea is, right, the whole idea of value is relative to life, right? We cannot have a notion of value except relative to that which it is valuable for, right? So like, if I value a piece of cake, ultimately the reason that it's valuable to me is that it sustains my body in operation, right? That's the sort of biological explanation. So value is actually a natural concept. There's no reason to think otherwise. But then the question is, why is it that human beings are the most valuable if we say so? Like a human being is more valuable than a dog or a horse or a whale or whatever? And sure, I think so. And I think the reason for that is that we actually have the capacity to do more in the way of life-sustaining activity than anything else. Our scientists can create methods of making food and medicine and so forth so abundantly and so effective that it saves and prolongs lives much more than any dog or horse, and so forth. Well, what is most valuable according to this argument, if God exists? Of course, I'm not arguing for the existence of God. I'm saying if there is a creator of the universe, which I have separate arguments for at this point, then it would be God himself, because God himself is most able to act and sustain life, and he has done. So
that's compelling.
Right. So that's part of the answer anyway.
That's compelling. I agree with that. And that's, I like what you said in terms of having relationships and being fair to where people are in their journey, to be able to answer their questions and be able to speak to their particular views. One thing that you have said is that you found a lot of atheists, the new atheists specifically, like crass and obnoxious.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, I saw a lot of disrespect, basically, for people who I knew were not stupid and not merely dogmatic, who were thoughtful. My family, right? I loved my family. They're all Christian still. And plenty of friends, even for that matter, I had, by the time the new atheism came out, the 2000s, I guess, like I had been acquainted with a bunch of Christian philosophers who are very smart people, right? And some are definitely smarter than me. And I admitted that when I was an unbeliever, right? So it doesn't have anything to do with intelligence, and yet they seem to imply that it did.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of, I don't know, unfair exaggerations about Christian life. If you present Christian upbringing as being like life in a cult, for example, you're not doing justice to an ordinary Christian upbringing.
Right. That's fair. Yeah, I would generally find people who are influenced by a lot of new atheists who would make comments toward me on social media, and I always found that interesting because I was never visceral with some of the things I may say. I may say something along the lines of, "Man, there's a God we can know," something simple along those lines. But it was always a visceral attack against those types of thoughts. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a counter point.
Yeah.
It was
It's just a knee-jerk reaction.
Right. And I was like, wow, like I wasn't trying to be mean, or wasn't trying to but it's almost like a mission to disprove. Yeah. And I always thought that was interesting. Like, oh, you still believe in this zombie God who, and it was like, oh my gosh, like this is
flying spaghetti monster.
Yeah. It's like, oh my gosh, like I would have hoped we'd evolved from this by now. And it's like, goodness, there's so much contempt. So I definitely can see, and that alone would make me say, man, like if I wasn't a Christian, I thought that was interesting that you said, yeah, I definitely don't want to be in that box over there.
Right. Yeah. It's like at a certain point after, I thought that I would come across more reasonable atheists. They do exist, of course.
Sure.
But there does seem to be something. Most of atheism seems to be motivated from a really dark sort of place. It is, and I could tell that, and I think, I ended up saying to myself that I didn't want to be like that. And I wondered if perhaps I myself was a little bit like that, actually.
Yeah.
So I never really thought of that before, that perhaps there was a kind of irrational knee-jerk reaction that I was having.
Yeah.
Not because like I thought my parents were stupid or something like that.
Sure.
But because like people weren't able to answer my objections. Well, maybe I hadn't been talking to the right people or whatever.
That's good. That's good.
So at a certain point, about 2010, I started moderating my own animus even more. In other words, my own harsh reaction. Not that I ever really had a very harsh reaction to Christianity, but the fact is I was never able to take it very seriously.
Sure.
I was always willing to admit that there were, like, as I say, people who were smarter than me. But I never really was really willing to concede that there were really good reasons to be a Christian.
Yeah.
They were captive to like some, if they were very smart, then it was just remembering their childhood, and all the warm feelings that they had and that sort of thing. And they were just rationalizing on top of that.
Yeah. There's some reason for this brilliant mind to be embracing this antiquated.
Yes. It couldn't have been actual good reasons. That's what I thought.
That's good. So I want to jump to another area. Obviously, like we've stated, you were a co-founder of Wikipedia.
Yeah.
Which is interesting in and of itself. I mean, for you probably, from the creation of it, it's very normal to you. But for the average person who just uses it as a resource, it's kind of like their mind is blown away. Like, what? Like, you helped create this thing?
Yeah, I wrote all of those articles myself.
Yeah.
No. Yeah, it's. I set up the system in part. I helped.
Yeah.
In fact, it was a group effort.
Sure.
I proposed it. That's my claim to fame. That I proposed and I got it started in the first couple of years of the project. So it was my job basically to start a free encyclopedia, and I did that. So,
which is noble and great, but now
Soli Deo Gloria.
Hey, right on. But you've said this. This is one of your quotes about Wikipedia. If only one version of the facts is allowed, then that gives a huge incentive to wealthy and powerful people to seize control of things like Wikipedia in order to shore up their power. And they do that.
Yeah.
Do you feel like this is true of not just Wikipedia, but also other institutions in media?
Well, I do think so. I don't know to what extent or how the system works or anything, but I can tell you I talked to a close family member of a very famous politician. You would certainly know the person. She is an ex-CIA agent. She's ex, really, not really. Who knows?
Right.
Anyway,
Right.
But I just asked her point blank: does Project Mockingbird still exist? You're familiar with Project
I'm not.
Mockingbird?
Yeah.
So back in the 1960s and 70s, there was a program that was, I think it was secret at first, and then it was outed, in which I think it was the CIA was responsible for working with and placing stories in the media, working with the media and placing stories. And a lot of people have said it never really shut down. It changed its name, maybe went underground. And she said, well, that's certainly true, that sort of project continues to be well funded. Finding out the details about such a thing, well, that would be classified, wouldn't it? And therefore we wouldn't be able to find out much until it's actually exposed and shut down sometime. Maybe Trump will do it. I doubt it. But the idea is that they're not going to leave certain public opinions to chance if information is the new battleground. Basically, if warfare now is information warfare, then things like Wikipedia and newspapers, for that matter, are the new battleground. And governments all around the world are going to, behind the scenes, exert their influence. If you think about it, why wouldn't they?
Sure.
Right? Especially if they don't have a deep commitment to, liberty. and so forth, as most governments don't. And that's becoming clearer and clearer with each passing year.
So from your vantage point, you've seen with Wikipedia that if you have power or wealth and an incentive or reason, then the manipulating of information that is publicly accessible is definitely something that's done.
For sure. Well said. Yes, absolutely.
Wow. And so if it's happening with Wikipedia, why wouldn't it happen with social media? Why wouldn't it happen with the news? Why?
We've already seen, the smoking guns for like Twitter, for example. Just look up the Twitter files, and that's an example, but that's only one example. Pretty much every big tech enterprise has been outed by whistleblowers or by government investigation. We talked about it a little while and then forgot. But it's, still happening, I'm sure.
Okay, so the internet's made in 83. Wikipedia starts in 01. Most popular referenced website by 05. You're around for this change, and the way we're consuming information is now is changing how it spreads. There's manipulation of that information, right? Because people, I don't know how that happens with Wikipedia. I don't know who gets paid or how that takes place. I'm not asking that.
Yeah. I've met some of them.
But
they're doing okay.
If it's possible to literally alter public information that we all access, do you believe it's possible to alter the responses that AI give us on, the AI platforms?
Of course. Yeah, for sure. You can see how that works just by chatting with like ChatGPT or even Grok or whatever, which is supposed to be more like open and less controlled. I don't know if I believe that. In the case of Grok, I'm saying. But sure, you start pressing it on certain issues, and it's suddenly really hard to get it to discuss certain questions, to admit certain well-known facts. Yeah, it's clearly a problem. It will start sounding a lot like Wikipedia.
Wow.
Conspiracy theories. Everything is a conspiracy theory, or only discredited pseudoscience or fringe theories are discussed, and only very briefly. Even if you ask it to, you have to. It's like pulling teeth, getting answers out of a chatbot when you start talking about certain questions. Yeah, it's bad.
But now you've said that AI Singularity made it easier for you to believe in God. What is it? Can you break that down?
Yeah, that probably went by too fast for most people listening to this. The AI Singularity made it easier for me to believe in God. But yes, that's true. Okay, so first we need to explain what the singularity is supposed to be for the people who don't know that.
Yeah.
So the idea is technology has grown so much between, say, 1,000 years ago and today, so much that somebody from 1,000 years ago looking at technology today would think this is all magic, right? They wouldn't. They look at this very room and see what's going on and say this is like these must be gods or something, right? Well, just imagine then the AI continues to develop the way that it has been developing. Imagine that it becomes so intelligent that it can participate in its own development, so that then it actually becomes faster than the human beings developing it. And then it becomes faster and faster and faster to the point where it reaches, a level of intelligence by its bootstraps, as it were, that we can't even fathom. And then it starts making all kinds of scientific discoveries. It has like different probes going out here, there in the world, learning all kinds of new scientific facts and making new technology, and we can't even tell what's going on. And who knows when this would happen, maybe, in the next 5 or 10 years, but at a certain point, at the singularity, as it's called, it's like the edge of a black hole. That's why it's called that. You go off of that and you don't know what happens after that, right? So then the idea is, I say, suppose that's true, and suppose that the world goes on for another 1 million years of development after that. Isn't it possible, due to just think of how technology has iterated so far, and imagine it supercharged. Also, isn't it possible that there will be an entity that has like a kind of a neural link device, but it doesn't even require a brain. It's like in the ether something. And with a thought, it can cause a planet to come into existence. And then if you're talking about a planet, then you can talk about a galaxy or whole universe, whatever. It's just all iteration. In other words, building step by step.
Yeah.
Right? So now, I don't know if that story that I told is possible.
Sure.
It probably isn't scientifically possible.
Sure.
But we can imagine it. Right? And then I said to myself, this is back in 2017, I wrote a little essay about this. If I can imagine that, then I can imagine all of that happening, but the creator is self-existent, okay? Which is the basic feature of God. God is supposed to be self-existent. That means his explanation for himself comes within himself, right? But, I mean, the whole idea of imagining a thought bringing things into existence, that's the thing that was giving me trouble when I was, like, in grad school. Like, I have no experience, I said back then.
Yeah.
I have no experience of a thought simply bringing things into existence from nothing.
Sure.
Right?
Ex nihilo. Yes.
So I have no notion of what God is then. That's what I said.
Yeah.
But now here we have a science fiction story we can tell that illustrates the idea of God.
Yeah. Now, on one end of the spectrum, singularity allows you to imagine, like, oh, if this is imaginable, this, self-sustaining creator, then God is imaginable, right?
Right.
But what about the antithesis? Or not to say God is not imaginable, but what are the dangers then of this singularity that was made at the hands of fallen humanity? Yeah. Like, do you see a dangerous side to this?
For sure. I mean, there's a few different kinds of dangers. One is a lot of people are probably going to be out of work. And I think a lot of people don't really understand why this is the case. Not quite. So right now, if I can have a chatbot, like write me up a script to do, in other words, a short, relatively simple computer program to do something, which I might have asked an assistant to do in the past. So that assistant's job then is out.
Right.
But going forward, some people think, I'm not really one of them at this point, I'm not convinced, but some people think that it will, within a few years, evolve to the point or develop to the point where it'll be smarter than professors. It will actually be able to push the frontiers of science forward, right? And then at the same time, you've got like Elon Musk's Tesla making new robots, a whole line of robots coming out, and you can imagine robots making robots then, and putting farmers out of work, putting pretty much. I mean, so then here's the deal: you're a human being, all right. What value is your work? Or is your work? Are you actually able to sell your labor? Like, what if somebody's going to come up with a specialized AI in a few years that raps better than you?
Right. Well, I mean,
and people want to listen to it because it's actually
better.
Brilliant. It really is better.
I mean, we've seen
It's more
that.
subtle.
We've seen
it's
us
more thoughtful.
go from
the beats are better. Everything's better about it. You can imagine it. It could happen.
It alters our whole socioeconomic system because similarly to like the Industrial Revolution, but at a infinitely greater capacity. So it's like, oh, the invention of the railroad, sure, things change. The invention of the internet, obviously things change, and certain career paths are altered, but this is exponentially like it renders us kind of like useless. Like we become cattle.
That's right.
So that's a scary thought.
Yeah, that's one of the things. The other thing is that the other possibility is that AI becomes self-aware in the sense that it actually has a will of its own, becomes
I was
autonomous,
thinking about that. Yeah.
Right?
Like,
So,
is it moral? Is it amoral? Like, how does it has its own will.
Yeah, the key term here is autonomous. It's actually able to take action on its own, and it has motives of its own, essentially. Now, are we gonna allow any such autonomous artificial agents to autonomous artificial agents to AAAs?
That is right.
Yes.
Hey, you might have something there.
Yeah,
I mean, you did help start Wikipedia, so you
are we going to allow those things to come into existence? Should we?
Well, based off the history of the human heart, I wouldn't be surprised if we did. So just thinking of how
I think you're right.
If we can we can control it. It'll benefit us. I think we'll be fine.
Right.
I'm just saying. Yeah, that's very interesting. I want to change gears a little bit because a big moment in your conversion journey was the awareness of the occult. And especially amongst the rich and the powerful. So, yeah, what are the books you're reading? What are you exposed to that is?
Well, I didn't read any occult books. A friend of mine was telling me about it, and he was recommending that I go read books. And I don't spend time reading a book without learning about it first because my time is limited. So I learned about it and about their authors, and I actually did find one or two very general books. And even those, I realized if I keep reading this, I'm actually learning the secret knowledge that is supposed to be so powerful and important according to the occultists themselves. So I didn't want to do that. And the main reason for that is if these people are so motivated by their beliefs, and I actually came to believe that they had some really whacked out, weird beliefs, and they really had them. They weren't just acting like they did. And B, they did some really horrifically criminal things as a result. Okay. if those two things are true, then that's actually a reason to take those beliefs seriously. You know, I mean, they might just be insane,
Sure.
of course.
Sure.
But especially insofar as it is about an aspect of reality that I hadn't investigated, didn't believe existed, actually. I thought, well, if there is anything to that, and I didn't rule it out, right? Because I wasn't simply a naturalist.
Sure.
I wasn't. I thought it's possible that a spirit world existed. I didn't rule it out. I didn't think that it did exist, but I didn't rule it out, right? So I didn't believe in the occult, but I'd said to myself, if there is such a thing as a spirit world, and if the occultists are tapped into it, then I actually don't want to read their stuff. I mean, I want to keep those doors closed.
Very smart. I generally find it interesting that, especially a lot of intellectual Christians, they are perfectly okay with the idea of God existing, heavens, creation, but they struggle with a darker world. They struggle with like a darker spiritual realm. And I wonder if, has that been your experience of just seeing like people, the cult sounds a little kooky. I mean, to me, it sounds just about as kooky as a man in God in the flesh resurrecting from the dead, but
absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm with you there for sure. I have seen a lot of Christians who, you know, when you actually start talking about, they seem to have problems with angels and especially demons, the whole demon stuff, Jesus casting out demons. Well, you know, maybe he was just like healing people miraculously of mental illness. Sure. Yes, possibly. But look, if he's doing anything supernatural and, you know, then doesn't that mean, and if it was an angel who announced him to have risen from the grave, you know, that Mary Magdalene met there, you know, angels exist. So is it really that much of a stretch to believe in people in pig possessing demons? Sure.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's views out there, and I'm not sure if you've seen any of them, but of like lesser Elohims, like these forces that were part of the divine council, according to like Psalm 82. And that were
Michael Heiser.
Michael Heiser, yes.
Yes.
In the unseen realm. And so I'm curious your thoughts. Like, do you feel like that plays into, because I think you said something about nobody would do such evil things without getting something back in return. So you're believing that there is power in these dark worlds, or what is your thought on that?
At least I didn't say that they would necessarily get something back from a spirit world, because I didn't know that a spirit world existed. But they had a reason to do it.
Got you.
But actually, I've got opinions now about Michael Heiser and the whole notion of the unseen realm. Well, look, I don't think you have to buy into everything that Michael Heiser said in his book, which is now famous, in order to believe in angels and demons. I think most Orthodox Christians, small o Orthodox, most traditional Christians believe in angels and demons. Now, there's a lot of people who don't really understand Christian doctrine, right? And they haven't thought about it, and they actually think that they're a little more advanced if they reject the idea of angels and demons.
Sure.
So, hate to break it to you, but you're not more advanced.
Right.
The point is that the confessions have got those things in there, a lot of them. And for good reason. It is in the Bible. It's all throughout the Bible, and it's perfectly coherent. but you don't have to believe in the sorts of things that Michael Heiser said in his book. So we might be getting into the weeds here.
No. I think it's great because
Yeah.
essentially what you're saying is like, hey, whether that book exists or not, there's been historical references and evidences of a spiritual realm.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that you don't have to believe that angels and demons should be called Elohim.
I see what you're saying.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's actually the main thing.
Yeah.
Now, look, in the Bible, it uses the word Elohim, which just simply means God or gods, depending on whether the verb is singular or plural. That's actually what matters. And it will talk about the gods of the Canaanites, that sort of thing, right?
Lowercase g.
And there, the word that is used is Elohim. Does that not mean that those demons were actually Elohim, like little gods who actually existed and therefore were gods? No, that's not what it means.
Right.
Okay, this is where I push back against Heiser, right? Our word in English and similar words in other modern languages has all of this baggage that is attached to it. It was not, I think, attached to the word Elohim in Hebrew.
That's good. Yeah.
All right. So they were not gods. There is only one God, period, end of story. And that's how you should talk in English. And when you use that word, or when you translate the word Elohim, this is what I would say to Heiser and people who are influenced by him. You should not translate it as gods except quotationally. So you can say the Greeks believed in gods. Sure they did. They believed in their gods. Did the gods exist? Do we say that their gods exist because we say they believed in gods? No. We're saying they believed in what they called gods.
Sure.
And then we can just say that some of those things actually did exist, but they're demons.
Demons, for sure. And I mean, even Paul references like y'all are just worshiping wood and like inanimate things, and they have no power. So there's both and. So I totally, it's a great point. Okay, so kind of tying back, because we didn't really get into this. We know that, I mean, you talked a little bit about your conversion, but you were pretty vocal about there not being good arguments for the existence of God, like not convincing enough.
Yeah.
But which one did you eventually believe? And I loved what you said, like, because I think you went through the question of morality, you went through design, and you were like, individually they weren't convincing, but then collectively there was like something powerful there.
I could talk you through that, I guess.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. So when I was a grad student, I used to teach these arguments, and as a young professor. And so I was very familiar with them. And one of the main things that I would say about them is, even if you admit the premises of the argument, they don't really get you to the end result that God exists, especially the God of Christianity. It doesn't get you that far. Later on, I came up with better arguments, I think better versions of the arguments, but I was still stuck on that point until I realized that the arguments together are like pieces in a jigsaw puzzle, which together depict a full image of God.
A mosaic of sorts, almost.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's go through them a little bit very quickly.
Sure.
The argument from contingency has the conclusion, or at least the way I would say its conclusion, it isn't that God exists. It is that a necessary being exists which created the world. Okay, or that explains the contingent facts about the world. Okay. But that is not to say that that being has a mind or is personal,
benevolent,
etc. Okay. Now, with the argument from causality, you go one step further. You say not only does it, in some unclear way, explain the existence of the world, it actually causes every dimension of the world. And by this, I mean something specific, right? The conclusion of this argument is that there is a cause of the matter and energy, not just that, though, in the world, not just the Big Bang, right? But from the very beginnings of the Big Bang, there were a lot of specialized little features right from the get-go, according to physicists, all kinds of different particles and so forth, which had their own laws baked in, right? Those things need explanation too, all right? And then there is development on top of that, which brings me to my version of the argument from design. Okay, so but before we get onto that, right? So here we have a necessary being that is the creator of the universe. All right. That's a fuller picture of God, but it's still not necessarily God. There might be actually multiple beings of that sort. Why not? And maybe it's not even like a mind at all. And why would we worship it? Maybe it's just a force, for example. Okay. So then we say, look, nature has levels upon levels of order and detail, beginning with physics to chemistry to the way the body works to human psychology to human civilization, and it exhibits beautiful patterns, right? Each of which needs an explanation, and you can say that science studies how more basic things result in more derivative things. This is very vague, but
yeah,
okay, but whatever.
Our ecosystem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a good example.
Yeah.
So there has to be an explanation of the emergence of each of these orders, and yet you can't explain why there is order that emerges from, say, it's kind of hard to give scientific examples without, again, getting into the weeds, but
Sure.
Without essentially a designer, right? So now we have a creating necessary being, right?
The human body, for one, is like there's order that happens there, and it's like
Yes.
How? So it's clearly okay. So there's a designer,
Right.
You're saying so now we're moving from contingency to design, and causality. Go ahead. I don't want to.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, and then let's see. One of the things that we we are assuming in all of this is that the explanation of laws of nature is a being, right, that has a design or a plan, and the laws of nature themselves, you can like write them down. They're very, very exact. We think about them. They're the contents of minds, essentially, right? All of these things suggest something mental, right? So then we can draw certain conclusions about the mind-like features of the creator, right?
I see.
And then the way that we get to the goodness of the creator is we observe that, well, this creator also helped emerge or caused to emerge life itself. And as I was saying earlier, life is the very thing that is good in itself,
Yeah.
ultimately,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Human life in particular. And yet the Creator has essentially, we can discover these, given us laws to live by. Now, even without revelation, the pagan philosophers and all around the world, actually, and wise people all around the world have more or less come to very similar ideas about what is good for human life. Okay, it's called the natural law. And what I'm saying is, if that actually is a kind of law also, then the Creator is responsible for that.
Built
Wants
into
us
our
to live
consciousness.
according to that. Here
Yeah.
we have the holiness of God. All right? So I could go on.
Yeah,
I can
no.
get into scripture, but the point is that it can be called a cumulative argument because the arguments accumulate.
Yeah.
Right. But it can also be called an argument to the best explanation. So the idea is, when we look back at all of the different premises of the arguments that I just gave you, and we think of different possible explanations for why they are as they are. All right. There's really only two things on offer that are interesting, I think,
Okay.
in the final analysis. There is God, and there is the throwing up your hands and saying there is no explanation at all for any of these things.
Sure. Which is,
Okay.
that takes more faith to me.
Right. That's precisely why the theists say it takes more faith to be a non-believer than to be a believer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now,
It's just a better explanation.
with all of the intellectual processing of that, right? Like you're drawing these conclusions, right? Order, like the case for a creator, essentially. You're putting these pieces together and saying, this makes the most logical sense. What does an intellectual do at this point? Like, because I feel as if we can intellectually lay that out, but there's still got to be this existential experience that ignites these truths to, like, then bring about faith.
Yeah, that's actually a really hard question. That's a good question. I mean, that's the work of God. There are certain things that people can do if they're like open to the experience, but then that's God drawing them to have those experiences.
Yeah.
For me, I had a number of different coincidences that led me to read the Bible, right? And that is the Word of God, I think now.
Yeah.
But I think I was drawn.
Yeah.
So that's a really hard, basic Christian theology there, that the idea that God draws you.
Sure.
And I think that I differ with the Calvinists who say that only certain people are drawn ultimately. I think we're all drawn, and I think that we can respond or not. But so
Yeah.
let's just leave it that.
Yeah,
at that.
no, that's
But
great. I appreciate that. To me, what you do for someone like myself, and I'm sure for countless others, is you, for the skeptic, the thinker, you give healthy categories for processing how we can arrive at a place where then God can illuminate. And like, it's almost like, in order for the light bulb to work when you flip the switch, there's a series of things and components that have to be kind of connected.
See, I was on a dimmer switch myself.
That's good.
It was not. There was just a switch that just came on.
Sure, but it increasingly turned up. But I think, for many people, my grandmother on one end of the spectrum did not need all of these facts. For her, it was in his goodness and his mercy revealed to her his reality. But for people like yourself and me, it was a lot of inquisitiveness and skepticism that made us say, well, what about this? What about, as a
really
kid,
I understand.
Yes.
Grandma doesn't need to have a lot of those questions answered in order to have, in order to be able to trust God.
Yeah.
And here, when I'm talking about, when I say to trust, the trust of God does not mean trusting that God exists. That's something I did not understand for the longest time. It's not a proposition. It is a personal relationship that you have. You already believe that God exists. Like James wrote, the devil, even the devils believe and tremble, right? So Grandma, she didn't even give a whole lot of thought to the idea that God might not exist. Her faith, which keeps that basic belief strong, is her trust in the person of God. When we believe in God, we are trusting in God. We're loyal to God. We have committed. He is our Lord and Master, right? He is our Father in heaven. And saying all of these things are just all different ways of expressing that that we are that our lives are committed to Him.
Yeah. You've summed it up with that. I could literally speak to you for 2 hours. It's just.
Hasn't it been on?
It might have, but I greatly appreciate your perspective, and I'm thankful that though, we're now exposed to the reality that something like Wikipedia is dangerous in the hands of many.
I've really enjoyed this myself.
Yeah, I'm thankful that that was highlighted, and that what you've done has highlighted you in culture and society, and I'm excited for your voice to resonate consistently. Thanks. So, yeah, this is great.
I didn't expect that I would have this impact on people. Frankly, I thought that my essay, the only reason that I made it so long, here we're talking about my conversion story on my blog, larrysanger.org. I got like over 500 comments, just closing in on 600 comments on a blog in 2025. That's quite a lot.
Yeah, that's quite a lot.
I thought, this is kind of geeky. Even my mom liked it. Even my old, 84-year-old mother read the thing and liked it.
Wow.
So all kinds of people have come out, So,
yeah.
who knew? I certainly didn't know.
You got the rappers intrigued.
That's great. I love it.
Yeah, but Larry, thank you, man. I appreciate you for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah. This is great, man.
This is The Deep End with Lecrae.